it was so cool to have this really rustic, really tough day of being on this four-wheel drive trail. And all of a sudden you come out and you're on the main road and you're seeing tourists again. And it's kind of like, wow, we had such a day and we saw all these amazing things and this really traditional culture and all of these animals and this beautiful untouched scenery. And then you just pop out and you're like, oh, there's tourists here and you're trying to see these things that we just got to see.
Welcome to the Seek Travel Ride podcast, where we share the stories and experiences of people who have undertaken amazing adventures by bike. Whether it's crossing state borders, mountain ranges, countries or continents, we want to share that spirit of adventuring on two wheels with our listeners. Hello everyone, Bella Malloy here, host of the show. Now, one of the joys of hosting this show means that I get to interview guests often while they're actually still taking their amazing bike adventures. So I've conducted interviews with people from all over the world. Now, our guest for today's episode, Laura McMillan, was in Zambia when we connected for this interview. It's so awesome for me to think that there's technology out there which allows me to connect with someone so remotely. But also it means every now and then I run into a few little technical glitches. Now, during this episode, Laura was without power, the generators didn't come back on, and while we managed to work our way through some little glitches every now and then, what it did mean was that when I got the audio file, there was a little bit of sound discrepancy there, and what I would call choppy or fragmented audio in Laura's sound file. It's only in a few instances and not throughout the whole interview. It's not your headphones, you don't need to do any adjustments, and you can always understand what Laura is saying, but that's just what's going on there. Anyway, that's enough of me rabbiting on. Let's get into this show. It's a real fun episode and I'm excited for it. Hello, I'm your host, Bella Malloy, and I'm excited to introduce my guest for today's episode of Seek Travel Ride, Laura McMillan. Laura was just 16 years old when she took a bike journey across the US. And I guess you could say after an adventure that big so early, things could have gone one of two ways. Either she'd be done with bike touring forever, or she'd be totally hooked on this way of travel. Fast forward to now, and it would seem the latter is very much the case. For the last few years, Laura has been touring longer term, and from an outsider's perspective, it would seem the more isolated the routes and sparse the landscapes are, the better. From the Baja Divide to the Australian Outback, Southeast Asia, the Middle East, and more recently now in Africa, her adventures have literally taken her all over the world. These journeys have shown her insights into regions and areas many of us have never travelled to. She's also clearly not put off by rugged roads or routes that require traversing long distances to connect resupply points, putting more weight on that funny adage, the journey can often be the destination. Currently, Laura is in Africa on a tour which she envisages may well take 5 years to complete. It's certainly not a point A to point B straightforward trip, rather an adventure that will allow her to explore each country to its fullest, giving her insights of the culture, people, terrain, history and wildlife all along the way. My mind immediately gets drawn to what it's like to be on an all-encompassing adventure lifestyle like this, and how with each trip undertaken, Laura's panniers are being filled to the brim with priceless experiences. I'm super looking forward to drilling down into these very experiences as I chat with Laura today, learning more about the highs, lows, and everything in between from her amazing bike touring adventures. Laura, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Bella. What a kind and exciting introduction. I'm excited to hear more about my trip. I mean, you make every guest sound amazing, so thank you for that.
It's no play on my part. I have amazing guests and you are definitely one of them, Laura. You're a listener to the show, which means you know that the question that I start my show with, and I ask it of all my guests, is, Laura, do you remember the very first bike you ever rode?
This is actually a big point of contention in my family. So my first bike that I got when I was about 5 or 6 was a pink little kid's bike with pink and yellow cupcakes on it, and it was so cute. I'm still living off that high, so if I can find another adult-sized bike with cupcakes on it, I would probably go for it. And we lived on a really quiet road, so it was really easy for me to learn how to ride. But when I was about, I think 6, still learning how to ride, I fell off my bike. Scraped my knees, not a big crash at all, nothing scary. But I decided that was it. I was done. I did not want to ride bikes anymore. And so both my parents enjoyed riding bikes. My sister, who was a year and a half older than me, was great at riding her bike. We lived on this quiet cul-de-sac where you could ride bikes all the time. My grandparents had bikes and they lived at the beach, but I was having none of this. I didn't want to ride a bike at all until I was about 9 or 10 years old. So 5 years later, I finally got back into riding bikes. And my parents always joke that I just had to take a few years off from riding, and then I really was able to fully commit to it. And now I bike full time. So my parents laugh at that a lot.
How old were you? You're 16 or something. You biked across the US. And when I read that, I thought, oh, wow, this is someone who's biked like forever. But you had like a hiatus from bikes.
Yeah.
Did you just hate the bike from crashing? Like, was that the cause, do you think? Like, in your mind, I don't want this anymore?
I think I was just really scared and kind of was just not into it. And my parents were always trying to get me to ride bikes. I remember one time my cousins came to visit and they were all riding bikes around our neighborhood because it was a really great place to ride bikes. And I was jealous. I was like, oh man, I really should get on this. This is actually pretty cool looking. So yeah, I don't really know what it was.
But now fully into it, clearly. When you weren't riding bikes and before you took that trip all the way across the US, what were your outdoor experiences like growing up then? Like, were you an outdoorsy kid? Were you more an indoors kid? Is the outdoors something you've loved since forever and your family, has it been a big part of you? Or is that also something that, you had a few years to sort of simmer into?
Absolutely. My family was a big outdoors family. From a young age, we were always doing things outside, and the house I grew up in, we had a little creek next to our house, so I'd always go and dig around in there, and someone had dumped aquarium rocks in there years prior, and so I always thought I was finding like buried treasure, finding these little blue rocks from an aquarium. I was legitimately an adult when I realized they were aquarium rocks. But my parents would always...
I love that so much.
It was really sad when I realized. I think I was midway through telling someone a story and I was like, hold up. Those were from an aquarium.
Oh, way to burst the bubble.
Yeah, right? But my dad was always really into taking us on adventures and finding adventure in everyday life. Some of the big ones were like we went to Danger Playground, which was just a playground from maybe the 70s that was metal and was kind of all rusty and really dangerous. But that slide was so fast and, it was really fun. And then he also took us on danger hikes, which were hikes kind of along rocks that were quite high up and was really scary for a little kid. So my dad was always finding ways to bring adventure in. And he worked as an engineer. And so he would take us out on site visits and we'd walk around these big construction sites and, go to see big construction equipment, which nothing's cooler than a really big backhoe when you're a 5-year-old or a 7-year-old. So it's always been little bits of adventure in life.
What other type of sports and stuff did you find you liked growing up? I know you cycled across the country, but, when you're talking about these sort of like mini adventures, it sort of exposes you to, I don't know whether risk is the right word, but it exposes you to different terrain, to sort of getting you comfortable with maybe being in uncomfortable situations. So were you embracing that in other type of outdoor sort of stuff?
Definitely. Throughout high school, I did rowing, which was really neat because most rowing teams throughout the US, it's like a high school team, but my team was a whole county team. So we actually just won absolutely everything because our team was just really huge. So you had a lot more rowers to choose from. But just being out in nature, I think, slowly became my favorite part of rowing. And I became less and less competitive and more just interested in being like, oh, I get to go in the water today and I get to look at all these cool birds and trees. And kind of years later, I realized I was like, it wasn't the actual physicality and the rowing that I loved, but I just loved really being in nature and getting this kind of piece of, you'd row under this bridge and it was tons of cars were passing over, but you were just pristine and on the water and it was all so quiet and just kind of realizing getting those little bits of nature in life.
It's definitely something I get from looking at what you've done is you're someone who really loves being deep within those big landscapes as well. Like you're mindful of your surroundings in a way, I would say, in that you're sort of taking notice of what's around. Do you observe that of yourself?
Definitely, definitely. I really enjoy researching and finding all of the information about where I'm at and the different histories of the tribal groups in the area for in Africa, kind of the different geology of the area and why it's important. And I feel like learning about all of these different factors helps me better feel connected to the area I'm in and helps me better understand the area I'm in. And just really love kind of being able to be aware and understand maybe why they act a certain way. Maybe they act a bit cold because this is kind of how they are, how they've grown up, and how what their customs are. And just kind of all that research makes me really appreciate a culture a lot more.
When you've been exposed to bike travel so different, so vast in so many different areas, it gives you so many insights. Like what you were saying, you're learning about a people, a culture, an area, its terrain, its geology and stuff. Does it broaden your mind to things? How do I want to phrase this? I often ask this, actually, Laura, to be fair, at the end of an interview. I always go, so what have you learnt from your bike adventures? But when you reflect back now, because you've had so many adventures through so many places, you get to experience all this, and it's like you've given yourself the online encyclopedia of knowledge to places that you visit, just in the way that you're doing it. Like, what are the sort of big things that stand out to you in terms of learnings about the world, about people in general?
I think, I mean, listening to a lot of your podcasts, it's kind of a similar thread throughout of people are kind and always willing to help. Just how happy and excited for you to be experiencing their culture and to be learning about their culture. And people are so excited to share about their lives, their village, their community, and want to show every part, of their community they can to you. And I feel like that's kind of a canned answer that you do get a lot, but it's so true. If people are just really excited, if they see you through their village or their city or their town, they think back to, I used to have a bike and I loved going places on it. These people are doing the same thing, but just on a grander scale. And I think so many people can relate to traveling on a bike, not long distances, not across a continent, but even just going down to the store. And that might have been 20, 30, 40 years ago, but they can relate to that. They like to transfer that excitement. And, people are so great and people are kind. And yeah.
I remember when I first started out with bike travel, the idea of interactions with strangers was never actually something that computed to me that that's what would occur when I did travel on a bike. Yet when I speak to people, and now that I know, it's almost at the very heart and essence of why a lot of people travel. And it's one of those, you can't plan an interaction with a stranger, but it's almost one of those beautiful parts of bike travel that you give yourself, is that you're going to give yourself those interactions with strangers as well. Was that something for you too? If I take you back to, say, that very first trip across your own country of the US there, and I imagine it was done in a very different form to how you travel now, right? Very different. But did you have those interactions with people then, or was that still in sort of like an organised tour cocoon form, and so you weren't even able to get those insights as strangers? Whereas fast forward to now, you're having people you've never met before, maybe every day, being part of their lives, them being part of your life.
You hit that so well on the head of prior to even bike touring that first time at 16 to now, meeting people it's not something I always think about. It's like, okay, I'm getting to this destination, I'm doing this, and I'm going to go see this waterfall and all this. But meeting people is always the best part of it, is always the most memorable parts. And so you hit that so well on the head. And in that bike tour that I did when I was in high school, I think the really interesting part about it is this company that I did it with, they'd been doing the same bike tour across the same routes for 30 years. And so that route that I'd been doing, I think they've been doing for 10 years. And so the really interesting thing is every year, maybe someone that goes to this church sees this group of teenagers on a bike. And so they say, hey, you can go stay at this church. And so every year, that happens once or twice. And so you end up staying at all these churches of like, this church met these people 20 years or 10 years ago. And so we've been staying at this church for 9 years. And so you do get to have a lot of those interactions of these people. You'd be staying at the church and the church members would come and they would be bringing food and they'd be just talking about like, oh, we met these people 7 years ago. And I think that was just such an interesting thing of like, there's all this history with this bike tour of meeting people but also we were staying in a lot of campgrounds. And so people would come over because if you see 12 teenagers with two barely adults supervising them, of course you have some questions. So, you're in the heart of middle America. And I remember one poignant time was we were at a campground for 4th of July and they were having a potluck celebration. And we made something as a group, but I can't remember what it was. But we were just talking to all these people at the potluck and how amazed they were and how kind and warm and accepting they were and just how really incredible it was. And it was kind of one of my first times having an interaction with people so far out of my comfort zone because, I'd grown up in the suburbs of Atlanta, Georgia, which is a pretty controlled place. And so all of a sudden I'm biking across country with a bunch of teenagers from the Northeast US, which is totally different to where I lived. And then you're meeting people in their 70s from middle America, which is totally different than anything I grew up with. So that was a really eye-opening experience to have at such a young age of how different people are. And you kind of grow up knowing you're like, oh yeah, people in Africa are different, but you don't think people within your country are so different. So that was really amazing.
I've had a few guests, and actually there was a guest that I had on the show, and he took his journey across the US with his father, who actually had dementia at the time, and he actually recorded all of those conversations with strangers, and he was talking about how all the insights from different parts of America and small town America. And I imagine that's sort of what you're learning as well. You're learning it's not just about where I'm growing up in the suburbs of Georgia. These people from the Northeast are so different, but you're exposed to the differences every single day, aren't you? And that's the beauty of bike travel. It's slow enough that you're only going a certain amount of distance each day, but you're seeing changes within that distance.
Definitely. And it's so cool to see how little things change. Sometimes it's imperceptible. You're just like, okay, the accents are still the same. And then you look back and you're like, no, like a week ago it was like this and the trees looked like this. And just kind of, it's beautiful being able to travel fast enough that you can see things changing, but slow enough that you're like, okay, yesterday was slightly different. And today, kind of go through 3 days and you're like, okay, and the soil's changed, the hills have changed. And it is one of my favorite unexpected parts about bike traveling this long and over kind of such a squiggly line, just being able to see how things change. And then you squiggle one way and you hit kind of a similar ethnic group again. You're like, oh, wait, I forgot about all of these things. And I think it has to be one of the best parts of long-term bike touring.
Of being aware of those small changes that then all of a sudden reflecting back, they become big changes too, don't they?
Yeah, yeah. It's really beautiful seeing the kind of the small things happen over time.
I want to ask then, okay, I can understand going on a cross. Well, actually, can I just say, how cool was being able to go on a cross-country tour when you were 16?
So cool.
I wonder if that's even a thing in Australia. I'm not sure.
It was just the most random thing. I mean, I just got a magazine flyer in the mail and I saw, it was a company that offered maybe 30 or 40 trips. And I saw this one and I was like, I'm going to do that. And in 2 years' time, I did it. And one of the really neat things is we started about 6 hours away from where I grew up, and then went all the way across the US. And so when I flew back after ending the trip, I flew back over the entire US almost to where I started. And just that realization of like, I'm on a flight that's 3 hours long and I did this over 6 weeks, just like unstoppable. And then I came back and I started school 2 days later and I was just like, oh, I'm so over this. I'm such a badass.
Because I was going to ask, did you always have that first tour there in your back pocket in a way? Like, looking at what you've done in the last few years, you've been to some amazing places, some very isolated places as well. How has that evolved? Like, how did you all of a sudden evolve from someone who took a bike tour across country as a younger kid to then adult work life to now bike touring?
I think after I graduated university, I did Peace Corps, which is a 2-year program through the US government where you go to a foreign country and you teach English or farming or healthcare based things kind of in a village. So I actually lived in Zambia.
You're in Zambia at the moment, aren't you, Laura?
Yeah, so I'm actually going back to my village in about 2 weeks, which I'm very excited about, nervous and terrified. So I've been here before. I've actually lived in Zambia for 2 years before. So I lived in a village with no electricity, no running water, and I taught sustainable farming practices. But Peace Corps does give you a bike, and it's so you can bike, to the school, to do a class at school on sustainable farming or whatever, or bike to farmers. And I also use that bike to just get out of the village because at times Africa is really intense. I'm sure you've heard that from a lot of bike travelers. If there's a lot of attention on you, you stand out, it's a lot different. And so I would use that bike to just ride into the bush. And I always was amazed at like how good I would feel just getting 15 minutes away from the village and the peace and quiet. And so I kind of incrementally started traveling during that. I had like one pannier, I didn't have two, but this bike wasn't great. Like the brakes didn't really work that well, but it was a bike.
Sort of like a prerequisite to a bike is working brakes.
Yeah, well, they sort of worked. That was my own fault. They didn't really work that well. But just, realizing that I could get out and I could feel so much better at living in this kind of stressful situation that was so different than what I had ever lived in, and kind of getting into that and being like, wow, this bike is opening up a lot of things. And I didn't really connect it to my trip across the US because my trip across the US in high school was so different. It was very intense. It was very regimented as a group trip has to be. And this was kind of just like, I want to go stay in a tent somewhere that's not my village. And then I just go bike away. And, that kind of another little spark of wanting to bike travel in there. And then I came back to the US after that, and I was working full time, and a bike shop in my city I was living in Atlanta, had a weekend bike tour. And it was about, I think it was 30% off-road on gravel. And I was still riding the same bike I rode across the US in high school, but I was way too big for that bike. It didn't fit me at all anymore. But on this bike trip, I made friends that I'm still best friends with to this day. And that was, I think, 8 years ago. And so it kind of ignited something in me of like, wow, bike traveling can be a lot different and it can be a lot of fun, and you can have all your friends doing it and get out and go somewhere beautiful.
And shout out to long-term bike friends, right?
Yeah, it's amazing. I'll definitely make them listen to this. So
hello, you can shout out to them if you want.
Hi, Kelly.
Hey, Kelly. I don't know you, but you sound awesome. I mean, if you're Laura's friend. You know how we were talking about bike travel, the cool thing is meeting all these strangers. You do also occasionally get to meet other bike travelers. And I often feel when you meet other bike travelers, they're people that sometimes you build fast friendships with too. Do you reflect back on, you would have met people on the Baja Divide, for example, that probably you're still in touch with?
Definitely from that trip, I can think of like, from this Atlanta trip I did, I can think of like 3 close friends from that trip that I became fast friends with because of that, all the way to Steph Devry, who I know you've had on the podcast.
Hey, Steph.
Yeah. We met her in Saudi Arabia and we cycled together for a few days. And then I think 9-10 months later, we met back up in South Africa, and we're constantly voice messaging and sending WhatsApps. And it's like, there's plenty of people in my life that I've met for much longer than that, but that's just such an intense friendship because those people do understand bike traveling, whether it's, they've done a weekend trip and I'm doing this full time, but they still understand even if they've done just one weekend trip. Like the understanding you get of bike travel after just one night is so different than you have before that one night.
I don't know if it's like the things that you're exposed to, whether it's also an understanding sometimes of, I guess there's vulnerability in bike travel too. And I don't mean vulnerability is in danger. I just mean vulnerability in the unknown. Some days you take off and you don't know where you're sleeping that night, or you don't know where you're buying food from, or you don't know what the weather's going to be the next day. Like, you're taking that on. And I guess a bike traveler understands what that means. I feel distinctly there would be some other sports that would know this, but bike travelers are the only people who really look at a windy day and really think about it, as opposed to other people go, oh, it's a bit windy today, but no one knows what that means to someone on a bike.
Definitely. I think the biggest vulnerability is also having to rely on people for basic needs. So often, no matter where I've been bike traveling, is like when you have to ask someone for water, it's like a really basic need. You're like, I just need some water, but it feels so intimidating going up to someone's house and knocking on the door and being like, do you have any water? And it's so rare that someone would be like, no, I don't have water. They'll only say that if they legitimately don't have water, but it's such a basic human need. And, that vulnerability of asking for something is really huge. That is, people, people that understand that and have felt that are kind of like, it's a big understanding.
I also feel, having been on bike tours before, you're also now an extra person in the world that sees a bike traveller and ultimately thinks, what can I help you with? Or do you need water? Or where have you come? You probably go a bit deeper than the general, hi, where are you from? What are you doing? Why are you here? The general questions you would get bombarded with sometimes. I've had it a few times on the show as well where guests say the best thing everyone in the world could do is go on a bike tour, because then the world would be an awesome place, because people would have all these learnings for themselves that they then appreciate the kindness of strangers and pay it forward. There seems to be a lot of bike tourers who then finish their tour looking at paying stuff forward.
Definitely. It is so, when you have to rely on other people for those basic things like water, or just when someone gives you something and it's just a little bit above and beyond and you feel that incredible kindness, you're just like, wow, that's so nice. I specifically remember in Namibia, we were on this really rural road and this lovely couple pulls over and they're like, we asked them for water and they gave us water and they're like, but we also have a like carbonated lemonade ginger drink that's 2 liters and cold. Do you want it? And I was like, I don't need that right now, but that is the kindest thing you could offer me in the world. This drink would have cost like 10 cents. It was super cheap, but it was just so delicious and thirst quenching. And just like that little bit of kindness is amazing. And also just, I feel like the language barriers that people are willing to work through is a really huge thing, because so often I feel like in the US, people are like, oh, if you don't speak English,
there's a barrier. It's on you. You're the problem. You don't speak it. Yeah.
Yeah. People are so willing to help you overcome something like a language barrier. They're willing to communicate with you through hand signals or pictures, that it's really, it's incredible kindness. And a lot of people I think don't realize how willing people are to form a connection and to just go beyond the bare basics.
100% agree with that. You would travel in a way where you know which countries you're going to. Do you default to learning certain phrases for each country? Like, this is the language of the country, so these are the phrases I should brush up on the most. And how do you deal with the language barriers before you head into somewhere, as someone who does so much research before you head out?
I think it'll become a very different thing in West Africa that has so much French speaking, but really for a lot of the rest of East Africa, it's quite English speaking. There's obviously in Tanzania, Swahili's a lot more predominant than English. But for now, I try to learn like how to say hello or how are you in a local language. But at this point, you learn hello in a local language and then you'll be cycling for 2 days saying it. And then all of a sudden you'll notice no one's responding to you. And you're in just a different language group. Throughout Zimbabwe and Zambia, there's just so many language groups. Really kind of go through it so fast that I've been kind of trying to learn, but it really takes 2 or 3 days for a new phrase to stick. And so by the time it's sticking, we're into a new language group. But I have to say, I'm quite excited because when I was in Peace Corps in Zambia, I primarily spoke Kaonde, which is a language spoken by 2% of Zambia. Zambia is like 17 million people, so it's not spoken by many people. So I'm really excited because I think in the next week, we'll be getting back into that language area. I'm 10 years on from having been in my village. We'll see if I can remember any of this language. I'm really excited to get to use that language again, even if it's only for like 4 days.
There's something awesome about being able to connect with people with a language. It reminds me, there was a guest, Helen Dainty, who did you meet Hells when you were in Saudi as well?
Yes.
Yeah. Hey, Hells.
In Saudi, yes.
Hello.
Hey.
She said something she loves doing as a long-term bike traveller is she likes to learn an idiom in the local language, and then when she says it, the local people just like, whoa, what did you just say? I wonder when you turn up to this place in Zambia, just even the fact that you can speak their language might blow their mind a little bit too, which would be pretty cool.
I think so. It'll definitely be, it's going to be so rusty, and I have such low expectations for me to be able to say anything more than hello. But it would be amazing if all of a sudden all my language came back. I really doubt it, but here's to hoping. But I like personally having a joke ready in every language. So I lived in Mexico for a bit during the pandemic, and I would say, like, people would ask me if I spoke Spanish, and I would say I only speak a bit of Spanish, but I would use the wrong word for a bit. I would use kind of the incorrect one, and that was always my joke. But people usually didn't get it because it was such a bad joke.
Can I just say, while we're there on the little rabbit warren of idioms or little things, individual things that you're doing, something that did come up, which has nothing to do with bike travel, but a lot to do with your personality is pine cone enthusiast. I need to understand this. What is a pine cone enthusiast? How have you become one? What is your obsession with pine cones and why? And realise, totally nothing to do with language, but what a segue.
Well, the really difficult part is having been in Africa for the past year, there's not a lot of pine cones here. There were some around Cape Town, but for the first year and a half I was traveling, every time I would see a pine cone, I just found myself like picking it up and taking a picture. And all of a sudden I realized I just had all these pictures of pine cones on my phone. And then I was regularly trying to post to Instagram to share my story of traveling with friends and family. And I was like, well, I'm taking all these pictures of pine cones. I really just need to share this. Then after traveling for a while, I went home and my parents had this like huge bucket of pine cones. There were just like pine cones all over the house. And I was like, this really is hereditary. Like this has been passed down to me. So I just kind of leaned into it. But unfortunately, there's been no pine cones for me really to get into. But I think also another part of that is pine forests, like pine plantations, are the best places to camp because there's often not a lot of undergrowth. So it's quite easy to put your tent down. But there's often a lot of like kind of growth around the sides of them. So you can really hide yourself quite well. So they're kind of like the perfect places to camp. So I've also found myself like kind of seeking out pine forests. I also just love pine forests and come from an area where pine forests are like the indigenous forests, and I find them incredibly beautiful. So it's kind of like pine trees are just popping up everywhere in my life, and I just have a small appreciation for them.
I think of that as an Aussie. Every time I see a eucalyptus tree or a gum tree that's not in Australia, I'm like, wow, there's a gum tree. And you would see so many in Africa, right?
Oh my gosh, the gum trees everywhere. I was about to say like, oh, you'd feel at home in like Cape Town. It's just solid gum trees.
I've heard that before as well. No magpies that swoop you there though, right?
Nope. No magpies. No magpies. So you're good on that.
You have experienced this though, haven't you, in Australia, the swooping bird?
Yes. So we were staying, Allie and I, as we traveled, we did a bike trip across Australia from Queensland to Uluru, and we were in the middle of the outback, and it was magpie swooping season, and we were staying at a campground, and the only road to get out of the campground and get to the grocery store, there was some super territorial magpies on it, which it was actually quite fun once I realized they weren't really gonna get you, but that sound when they kind of clip your helmet, or I don't know what they're doing, but it's really loud and it's really scary.
It's like if they snap their beak.
Is that what it is?
Well, there's 3 levels, right? Can I just say, I love magpies. I love their warble. And I also need to say, the magpies in Australia are not the magpies that you have here in Europe, people. They're different birds, different birds distinctly. They make different noises, but they're both called magpies. Yeah, first it's the warble is the nice sound, and then in magpie season they make an attack noise. And with you're on your bike, once you've heard it once, you know what that noise means. So there's 3 levels. One will come near your helmet and just clip their beaks. The next one will actually hit your helmet. And then the last one, the worst of them all, will actually just go for I won't say go for the kill, but they go for underneath your helmet or into your eyes. There's some notorious ones where I used to live that would actually land on your shoulder and keep attacking you.
What?
Yeah, I know, they're next level. And then people try to put like zip ties on their helmets and eyes on the back of their helmet. Nothing. Yeah, no. The best thing that actually works for magpies that attack people on bikes is to actually just get off the bike. They sort of stop straight away.
Really?
There are magpies that only attack pedestrians and won't attack cyclists.
Wow.
And I'm sorry, I feel like I've just totally hijacked your interview here, but listeners who want to learn more about Australian magpies, this is what you're in for. The other thing is, it's sort of an unwritten rule. If you're in a group and someone's being attacked by a magpie, but you're not, you do need to laugh at that. Like it is amusing until you're attacked and then everyone laughs at you.
I'm loving this. I'll have to say I listened to another podcast a few months ago that was all about magpies, and I was equally like engrossed in it. So give me more magpie facts.
You get some notoriously territorial ones, and they're the ones that you sort of want to avoid, and they like swoop for ages and ages. I had ones that would swoop like 10 times, and then I remember trying to think, well, how long can a bird live for? And I was thinking, surely it's only like 5 years. It's like 25 years. I'm like, oh man, no, I'm done.
It's so long.
They also apparently remember faces.
That is a fact I remembered.
With my curly hair, I used to think they thought my hair was a nest or something. I don't know. Anyway, we'll move on from that.
I love this.
Well, I want to take you back to the Baja Divide then, Laura. forgive me if I'm wrong, but that feels like one of the first bigger sort of off-road, longer-term bike tours you did. Am I right there?
Definitely, definitely. So I quit my job and yep, the Baja Divide was the first bike tour I did, the first long-term one. Before that, my longest adult bike tour had been 2 weeks, and it was an off-road tour, but it was in Vermont, which is quite quaint, very lots of water, trees, and all that. So it was really different. And the Baja Divide is notoriously difficult. And then I also decided to do the Baja Divide with Allie, who, spoiler, is my current boyfriend. But at that time, we'd only been dating about 2.5 months. So it was really, really risky. Before meeting him, I'd already decided I was going to quit my job and do the Baja Divide. And then we started dating, and I was telling him about this, and he was saying like, oh, I'm also going to do the Baja Divide at this time. And, I was like, oh, that'd be interesting. I'll see you on it, but we're not going to do it together. And then, things happened and we ended up doing it together. We had done some bike trips together, just weekend ones. And then we decided the Baja Divide we were going to do it together. And it was definitely a bit rocky at times when you're doing a big bike trip with someone you're dating. It's hard, let alone after 2.5 months. And it was really great. We really enjoyed it. And, there was definite ups, there was downs. We learned to communicate really well. We just had to. And it ended up working out really, really well. So we're still traveling together to this day.
It would either go one of two ways, wouldn't it? You'd either totally not want to see each other ever again, and that would be it. Or you would just find out, actually, us being together is a great thing.
Definitely. When I went back home before I started on this trip, I had a lot of friends recommend, like, you should take 2 tents. And I was like, oh, yeah, that's actually probably a pretty good idea. But I ended up not taking 2 tents. And I think at some point there might have been times where if I had my own tent, I would, I just want to do this on my own or something. But, that challenge of like, we have one tent, we're in this together, it really helped. And it was a lot of fun. And the Baja Divide, we've known a lot of people that have done it now, friends online, friends in person have done it. And it's a really challenging tour. And I legitimately don't know if anyone's had as good of a time as we did on it. Like, we just really loved it. And I love Baja Divide.
It's introduced me to so many different types of cacti. I never realized there were so many different cactuses in the world.
And they all will pop your sleeping mat. Every single one of them.
You had such a struggle. Iron-on patches, what?
Why? Who has iron-on patches?
We need to talk about the sleeping mat disaster on the Baja Divide.
So I had the sleeping mat for a number of years. I really loved it because it had this nice kind of top to it that you could just lay flat on, that you didn't like stick to. On the Baja Divide, there's tons of little prickers, tons of cactuses of all types. They're so beautiful, but they will pop your sleeping mat. And so I got a hole in my sleeping mat and I was like, no problem. I found the hole and I was like, time to patch it. And I look at the patches and it is iron on only. And I'm like, who does this?
Who does do this? Like, I don't understand.
Who does that? So angry. So then it was another 4 days until our next rest day. I get to the hotel and I ask them, like, do you have an iron? And there's a language barrier. My Spanish is not great. And, they leave. I'm not quite sure what's happening. They come back later and they bought an iron for me. And so I'm ironing on the patches. Well, it turns out I got too excited and the iron was too hot and I just burned a lot of new holes in my sleeping mat. So,
which again goes back to the whole iron. To me, my mind boggles that you would put an iron near a sleeping mat in the first place.
Why would they be iron on?
Why? Did you ever get an answer?
Never got an answer. Big Agnes is on my no list. I love that sleeping mat, but nope, they're dead to me. They're done. But one of the really funny things about this is I had that sleeping mat disaster. Then in Australia, one night, Allie asked for my sleeping mat and I threw it over to him. I threw it on a big spike. So I only had a working sleeping mat for like 2 weeks between that, or 3 weeks, because in between that, I was in Southeast Asia with no sleeping mat. Anyways, through a long story of events, Allie and I think, have only had 40 nights where both of us have both had sleeping pads that stayed inflated all night.
Do you think there's a curse?
There is a curse. There's a curse. I'm certain of it. There is a curse.
What do you need to do to break the curse?
I don't know. I thought it recently was broken, but I have holes in my sleeping mat right now that I can't fix, that I can't find where they are.
Allie, who, FYI people, if you want, you can also listen to my interview with Allie. I've got him here on the podcast, Allie Denham, the person behind the Big Account Cycling About. And one of Allie's things is he's a big reviewer. So I want to know, when the reviewer gets a problematic sleeping mat, like, what happens there? Is there a full-scale review? Has Ali reviewed sleeping mats that are, yes, this is for this country, no, this is not for this country? And have you even considered maybe getting the sleeping mats that aren't inflatable?
I considered that one time briefly when I was back in the US just doing weekend trips, and I don't like them at all. The big issue with the sleeping mats, because he has one he really likes, he had it for 7 years, no problems. And then he bought a new one. And so, like, at the end of 7 years, it was getting holes. It was having problems. He bought a new one, slept on it one night, and then it was stolen.
This is the curse.
This is the curse. He's 6'6", couldn't find a new sleeping mat in South Africa that worked. And so he bought a really cheap one. And so that's like the curse we have a curse of sleeping mats between us.
I wonder what you need to do to break the curse.
Something needs to be sacrificed.
Someone's firstborn something.
Yeah, I'm willing.
I have a really good friend of mine. Hi, Pam, as we're talking about really good friends. And we went through a run of every single ride we would do together. It felt Pam would have at least one puncture every ride. But it was always in this certain area. And so we always used to say that there was Pam's puncture curse. And then we had to sacrifice something for the puncture gods.
Need to like burn a candy bar or something, like some really good cycling food, and be like, this is my offering.
It has to be something that fills you with loss that you have to sacrifice it to, though, doesn't it?
I think for me, it's a jar of pasta sauce.
Yeah. Well, actually, that's very apt as well. Your Instagram name, Laura Bikes and Snacks, this is quite apt for you as well, Laura, because you're a big food lover too, right?
I absolutely love food. I spend so much time researching food and researching, when's the next Indian restaurant, when's the next Chinese restaurant, because particularly in Africa, there's large Indian populations and large Chinese populations that are a bit decentralized. I'm always looking out for all of these good restaurants. So recently we spent 2 weeks working in Livingstone, Zambia, which is home to Victoria Falls. And we stayed at a backpackers there for about a week. And as part of this, we're meeting travelers every day. And so people would always be like, oh, what are you doing? What adventures? And I'm like, well, I'm going to this Chinese restaurant tonight. And then I'm going to this grocery store because this grocery store has all of these things that I want. And everyone there was talking about all these adventure activities they're doing. And all I was focused on was all the restaurants I was going to eat at.
Laura, I can't wait to spend time with you sometime.
I'm so excited.
We're just going to talk about food because I always have to talk about food at some stage during the episode. And I want to ask you then, not restaurant related and definitely not something that you'd buy that you could get in multiple countries. I want to know some sort of local food that you've discovered on your bike journeys that was like, wow, this is an amazing thing. Hey listeners, if you're loving the stories and adventures I'm bringing to you each week, consider supporting Seek Travel Ride by buying me a coffee. Your donation helps me keep the show going strong and bringing you even more inspiring content from our guests. Just head over to the Seek Travel Ride Buy Me a Coffee page. Every little bit helps and is deeply appreciated. Plus, it's a great way to show your love for Seek Travel Ride. I've included a link in the show notes. Thanks so much for being part of our community and for your support. Okay, now back to the show.
The food in Jordan is amazing. The Jordan Bike Trail is one of the most difficult cycling things I've ever done. You're going down these valleys, and so you're at the top, which is level ground. It's like where all the villages are. And then you go down 1,000 meters into a valley and then go up, and it's so difficult. But you get up to the top, and there's all these falafel and hummus dealers or restaurants, all these shops. And so we'd go buy falafel at one, and they always give you a falafel to try. And then the guy next door would be like, oh, try my falafel too. And by the end, you're eating 6 different falafels, and you're like, oh, this is amazing. And so everyone knows about how great Middle Eastern food is, but Mozambique has had amazing food. So they were colonized by the Portuguese, and that had a lot of influence on bread there. So you'll be in these tiny little villages, and there'll be a guy selling bread just in a plastic container on the side of the road. And it is this amazing, crusty, ciabatta loaf. And then it was also avocado season while we were there. So we were just eating these incredible avocado sandwiches. And they're very into hot sauce too there. So you'd be putting on hot sauce and cashews, and it was just so good. But they also have a lot of coconuts there and a lot of local food with coconut milk. So they had the kind of a spinach, coconut milk, and cashew spicy stew that you could get a lot of places. And so the food in Mozambique was so good. And also in Mozambique, there's really kind of only one road you can ride along because it's so sandy if you go out of this road. And so the beautiful thing is just every day we were able to almost eat out food every day, which sometimes it would be like an hour and a half because the restaurant would be like, yes, of course we have that. And they actually have to go to the market and buy the food, make food, whatever, small detail. But the food was just so good there.
Wow. I love this about the show because I learn about other countries and their food. Like I've never had anyone talk about what the cuisine in Mozambique's like. I've never even thought about it.
Right, right. And Jordan was a favorite, but everyone knows about Middle Eastern food and how good falafel and hummus is. But Mozambique, it is a bike traveler's paradise in terms of food. The roads, it's a bit boring. It's one road, but it's a quiet road, so it's totally fine. But the food is it was amazing. The best food in Africa by far.
I want to take you back to Jordan and the Jordan Bike Trail. Bear in mind, listeners, I've been scrolling through Laura's past posts on this, and when I go to Jordan, Laura, there's a theme. I don't know if you've actually looked back at them or if they're just burned into your memory, but the theme is pretty much hike a bike. Who made this trail? Is this the face you make because you're content and looking away? Or this is the hike a bike face? Like, there was a lot of the Jordan that was hiking, not biking, would you say?
Yeah. Yes. So Jordan, I can't recommend anyone in Europe enough to just take a short flight over to Jordan. It is a bit hot in that area right now. There's a lot of considerations, but when things are a bit quieter, Jordan is so amazing. It's a small country and there's a really dedicated team of people there that have made an amazing bike trail, which really stays off the main roads as much as possible. But to do that, you kind of have to do some silly things sometimes. And Jordan Bike Trail, the website does say, like, we try to descend on dirt and ascend on pavement as much as possible because the ascents are really intense. And they're not kidding. It is steep, 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 and sometimes really sandy. But it's so beautifully curated in the fact of you're going by all of these really amazing ancient civilizations from Petra that everyone knows to like lesser known castles and other things. It was really intense and all the hike a bike was really difficult, but it also had such a big payoff in that you're going by all these amazing sites. The scenery was really incredible. And you also weren't ever that far away from good resupply. And good resupply is there was all of these Turkish places selling really amazing sweets and the food was amazing. And so Jordan really has that perfect payoff difficulty of like, it was really difficult and there was a lot of hike a bike that was really intense, but it also was really beautiful and so worth it.
Sometimes the difficulty adds to that factor of, it's that concept of a descent is so much sweeter if you've had to climb the hill to earn it sort of thing. But I actually want to know, when they were saying we try to make the ascents on the asphalt where possible, and like I've seen people, like it's 20-something% gradients a lot of the time too. Like it's stuff that you look at and go, can I even make it 100 meters or can I make it 10 meters? I'm not sure. What are the descents like when the descents are on dirt? Because, and I say this, Laura, as how at the very start of the show, when you were talking about your cupcake bike and how you fell off when you were 6 and then that was it. I had a fall off my mountain bike, not when I was 6, when I was 20, late 20s. And it was a slow fall and then I didn't get back on. And ever since that fall, I then got back on, then had another fall at fast speed and then didn't get back on straight away. And so now I'm not a massive fan of descending. I actually would almost prefer that the descents were on asphalt.
I am actually very similar. This is something that I've heard you talk about in the past that I totally agree with. I descend so slow. I will always be behind all of my friends descending. And my partner, Allie, rephrased it for me. It's like, you're just getting to enjoy more of your time. Like, I'm only getting to descend for 3 minutes and it's gone and I'm done. But you're getting to descend for 6 or 7 minutes and you're having, you're just extending your fun. And so I like to think of it as that of, I am a slow descender. I really don't like the thought of wrecking. I'm not super confident. And that lack of confidence is just more dangerous because then I like slow down and I grab a handful of brakes when I really shouldn't. And so it's kind of self-perpetuating of like things are getting more and more dangerous as I'm doing worse and worse
and then
things.
psychologically it builds it up, right? Oh my gosh, I'm
Yeah,
with you, sister.
Definitely.
I can't wait to bring you to the Pyrenees. We can descend slowly and enjoy the views for longer together.
And we'll have 20 more minutes of fun versus everyone already ended theirs.
Totally. So then back to the descending then. When you're descending down minus 20-something% grades on rocky surfaces, what are you like there? Like, what are you thinking?
Most of what I'm thinking is right rear, because I'm just like, which brake is rear? Which am I not supposed to pull? There was a really epic descent from Lesotho into South Africa called Sani Pass, and it's touted as like one of the most epic 4-wheel drive trails in the world, and it's incredibly beautiful and it's so scenic. But I do have to admit, like half the time I wasn't enjoying it because it was so steep, and I was like, I just can't wait for this to be over. I'm so scared the entire time. And I think during those times, I just need to like take a breath and be like, okay, it's fine. Like it's totally okay to walk down things, and it's not bad. But I definitely do struggle with big descents. I wish I had an answer of like, oh, it's just so fun. But I'm not that like thrill-seeking fast person that like screams down things. If I can't see the whole way in front of me, I'm just going to go real slow until I can see all the rocks and know what to avoid.
Can I tell you something that's made a little bit of a difference to me, but I can't recommend
Please.
it. Like, it's not going to fix you. Well, actually, there's two things. One, recently I've actually put I've got a suspension stem, and that has smoothed the road out.
Yep.
That has given me so much confidence. Quick shout out Redshift Sports, thank you. But it is amazing.
Yep. I want to shout out Redshift Sports. I have Redshift seat post. I love it. Every bike tour needs suspension. It makes everything better.
I didn't actually realize how much of a difference it would make, but it has made a big difference. And I've got their seat post too. And they're supporters of the show, full disclosure. I'm not getting paid to say this, people. I'm just putting it out here. Since I've put that on, and I'm in the Pyrenees, and we're not on dirt roads. They're tiny and they're beat up, especially where I am, where you've got tractors and stuff that have made them all like patchy, or there's roadworks that have put pothole patches over pothole patches. But since I've had that, that's made them smoother. But the other thing that I do, and I generally only do this when I'm on my own, and because I descend so slow, generally I am on my own when I'm descending anyway, I sing like badly, but I try and sing like a happy song, and I try and tell, yay, you're enjoying this, and like, and it helps a little bit.
Okay. This is actually pretty similar to what I do, because I have heard singing helps a lot. I pretend I'm a truck, and I just make really loud truck honking noises, or like I'm shifting gears, and I'm like pretending I'm like in my head building up what kind of truck I am. Like I'm a big semi truck.
Are you ever an Australian road train?
Absolutely, yes. I loved road trains in Australia. I love getting trucks to honk for me.
That is a thing. That is another one of your things.
I love it. It is just like the pure joy of getting a truck to honk for you is so much fun. And road trains are so much better. Quick side story on this. In Australia, all the road trains would all have the CB radios. They'd all be talking to each other. And in Australia, we realized the truckers were telling each other to honk for us, because the truckers started honking before I would ask them to start honking. It was amazing.
Is this like Truckee Channel 40? I think I remember Claire White was telling me she had a CB radio for the truckies. That was something that she said was awesome, but I love that they were preempting the horn.
So exciting. It was amazing. It was just in my day. And so, yeah.
Ali's not as enthusiastic about it as you are.
He's not. He does like it, but I think sometimes it really freaks him out, because I'll be behind him and I'll get him to honk and he won't realize it's coming. And so he'll get kind of scared. So I think sometimes he gets a little annoyed at that. But I have to admit, I also did recently play up that he's not as into it in an Instagram reel. He doesn't really mind or care, but he's definitely not as into it, because I'm really into it.
You know, when you were talking about Jordan Bike Trail, really steep roads there, and because it was such a tough time, but it was also so much sweeter, there was a beautiful history and beautiful vistas and stuff. Both of you as a pair definitely seem to take on the road very less travelled. I want to take you to a place, I think it was in South Africa, it was at the Hell Road.
Yes, the Hell. Die Hell. It sounds a lot better in Afrikaans.
Very aptly named, right?
Definitely. So this road there used to be, in the 1800s, there was a community down in this valley, because there was always water in this valley, and it was a really lush valley that's completely surrounded by desert. And before cars, the people in the village got down with this super steep, it's, I think, 1K, and you lose 700 meters. So it's really vertical. I guess maybe it's 500 meters, but it's really vertical. And you're basically just hiking a bike kind of on the brakes, just trying to not have our bikes get completely away from us. And so we were going down this path, and previously we'd met people the week before and everyone's like, you're not going to make it. You're not going to be able to do it. And I think that fueled us a little bit. Also, there was kind of this path linked up 3 really beautiful areas that we otherwise couldn't reach. So it was like, all right, this is an adventure because people with fully loaded touring bikes that live on these bikes really haven't done this. This is going to be really intense. And it also just links up all these other beautiful areas. I think the excitement of just not knowing if we could do it was amazing. But I think now it's faded a little bit, the memories of just how difficult it was. Because I do have a picture of me lying down at the bottom of being like, I will never do that again. And it was really difficult. And then the next day, getting out of D-Hell, we have to climb up all the way. You descended down and some more. So there's 700-meter climb out that is consistently at 13% grade. And so it was 42 degrees Celsius, which I think is like, it's over 100 degrees Fahrenheit. And you're just climbing nonstop. And there's not a single tree on this climb. Of course, no houses, no water, nothing. And so that was actually way more difficult, was climbing out of there because it was so hot and difficult. But I think the just excitement of doing something that I didn't know if it could be done and pushing my limits of being like, this is really difficult, but I really enjoyed it and had a great time was totally worth it. And I think we take things really slowly when we travel. If you're not having a good time, like just sit under your tree and rest for 30 minutes, an hour, 2 hours, set up camp for the night if you have enough food and water. And I think that's a beautiful thing of traveling this long and not having kind of the agenda of I need to make it to this point because I have to fly home. That's kind of a beautiful thing of not having that schedule and just getting to expand out and take the time, and whether that's immersing yourself in the culture or just giving yourself an extra rest day because your body's tired.
I think there's so much that's great about what you've just said there. And I've spoken about it with numerous guests before, and guests who've learnt this journey from doing it the other way around first, from having the really rigid, defined route that they're going to take to the daily distance to they know where they're going to stop. Some of them, we have to get to this hotel or we're going to this town, depending on the style of tour. And then they've realised, as many people do, that things will go unplanned on your bike tour. Problems that never existed to you before you set out will come their way. It's just life, and especially on a long distance tour. And so having a rigid structure is just like an extra level of stress that you got to maintain. Now, fully appreciate some people travel in a way where that's unavoidable, like what they're doing, like they need that structure. If I was to take you back to that tour you did across the US as a 16-year-old, there would have been a lot of rigid structure there, right?
And a 16-year-old needs rigid structure.
True. There's things where a mechanical happening or a road being flooded or something, that's the unplanned, that's out of your control. But sometimes just acknowledging that it's okay to just be having a bad day and you physically aren't or mentally aren't at it and you need a little break, that's also another good reason to just take a chill day and to take things slower and maybe stop earlier as well.
Definitely. I think that's, coming at bike touring from, I did a lot of bike tours when I had my corporate job before quitting and traveling full time. And in those tours, you have 2 weeks and you really I would plan out those 2-week trips for months at a time. And I'd try to be like, okay, we're going to camp here, we're going to camp here and know all this. And just looking back at that and seeing how different this travel is now and just how many things come up that you just don't expect. I had to spend 45 minutes the other day looking for bleach because my water bottles were getting gross. And, that's just that's an extra hour that you're not biking because you're just looking for something that you thought was quite simple to find, and not having to plan, that's a real beauty.
There's sometimes the unexpected moments which aren't problems, which are beautiful things. Like you discover a place you didn't know existed and you want to spend more time there too, right?
Absolutely. There are just incredible places where you get to and you're like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. I can think a lot in Mozambique. People before getting to Mozambique, people were talking a lot about how beautiful the beaches are. And I've always enjoyed a beach, but when I'm planning a vacation, I'm usually a mountains person. So beach or mountains, I'm usually mountains, but Mozambique had such incredibly beautiful beaches with really kind people. And so you get to them and you're like, maybe I do want to spend an extra day here. It was a little frustrating in that case because the Mozambique visa was a bit shorter. But in a lot of other cases, South Africa, we spent 6 entire months there just exploring the country and really getting to know a lot of it. And so it is really nice to be able to have that, okay, this is really nice. I'll spend a day here. And especially when traveling Africa, there are a lot of times where things aren't as comfortable as you would like. And so if you get to a town that has a good restaurant. Food is so important, or, has a good grocery store, just being like, okay, this is a good place to sit and just be.
When you're talking about with Africa, things, aren't as necessarily as comfortable as what you'd expect. So sometimes when you get to places where there are those comforts, you want to spend extra time there. If I'm now going to take you to Australia, where it's not that things aren't comfortable, but it's just like the services are sort of non-existent for days as well.
Yeah.
How do you like dealing with that type of isolation when you're riding? Because I think when I saw your Australian trip, I think it was from the Great Barrier Reef all the way to Uluru. It's something ridiculous. I think it was at like 2,000 miles, 3,200 kilometres, I think, if I've got that right. Anyway, whatever, big trip. And you had like 5 supermarkets on the whole journey?
Yep. I believe it was 3,000 kilometers, like 3,200 kilometers. And 5 grocery stores along the way. And there was one point we were really close to Uluru, and I just kind of got the number of snacks we needed wrong, and we spent $60 on 3 bags of jelly beans. They were not good jelly beans. They were like the giant big jelly beans that are just off-brand and terrible, but it was just, stuff was so expensive.
Whoa.
Yeah, it was painful.
My mind just boggles.
It was so expensive, and that was like the only food option because their restaurant was closed, and they just didn't have anything else. So we spent $60 on jelly beans. And then we ended up not needing one of the bags of jelly beans. And they were so gross that we didn't even eat them. I don't even know what happened with the jelly beans. I don't even want to see them. I just want to pretend this doesn't exist. Australia was a different level of difficult in that planning. We did send packages ahead to us of just like, we bought a bunch of fruit leathers. And one thing that saved us a ton of money is we shipped sunscreen ahead, because sunscreen in Queensland and Townsville was like $1 a bottle, but in Outback Australia it was like $19 a bottle. So we're like, oh, we saved a ton of money. We're so lucky on that. But shipping ahead some food helped. But then also kind of a secret little, not a side hustle, but something of enjoyment I do is when we go to these towns, there's often not pictures of the grocery stores or any of the shops there. And so I'm an avid Google reviewer I take pictures of the grocery stores and everything they have, just in hopes that like bike tours that come after me, if any do this crazy route that we've decided to do, they know what's ahead of them. Because it turned out in one of the outback towns of Australia, there was this grocery store, but there were no pictures of it online. So we were like, it's not going to be anything good. It's going to be pretty bleak. We get to this town, they're having like 6 different types of hummus. They have bagels. This grocery store is great. And we just didn't know we could plan for that. So that's kind of a little thing that I do to try and help people that come after me.
Grocery store reviewer. I love this.
It's a secret little thing I do that I love.
It's also a cool thing of learning about a different countries, like what is in the small sort of grocery stores as well.
You do. It's also, you learn a lot about how people act in a grocery store, and what's the line like? Do you need to be like right next to people so you don't get cut in line, or is it okay to be a little further away? Because if you're in the Netherlands and you're touching the person in front of you, like, they're going to lose it in the grocery store. The sociology in a grocery store I find fascinating. I was in a grocery store a while ago and the power went out, and so it got really dark in there. And in the US, people would have freaked out, but no one made a single sound. It was just like, oh, this is normal. This is average. And so I found that really interesting.
Can I ask, Outback Australia, what are you initially seeking out when you were saying you were the snack buyer that time where unfortunately you failed in your snack duty, sadly? Like, what are you seeking out primarily?
Oof, it really depends. You're going for a full grocery store, I want to see like salad greens. Like it could be iceberg lettuce, but anything above iceberg lettuce is just absolutely treasured. So a day that I'm not cycling, I love just doing a huge salad where like the lettuce or salad greens are definitely a minor player, but like beans and tomatoes and carrots and all of these delicious things. Really good, fresh vegetables, and I love fresh fruits. So apples, bananas, oranges just make me so happy to see. If I can make a really good salad, like I am just in absolute heaven. The way that me and my boyfriend split it up is I cook dinner, I cook all the meals when we're on rest days, and he cooks all of the meals when we're traveling. So he'll cook dinner and breakfast when we're traveling versus that's more my responsibility when we're on rest days, because I take a little bit more care in cooking our food. I want to saute something like this and do a couple more steps versus I think he could just boil everything and be happy.
It's interesting what you were saying, how you can't wait to get like that fresh fruit and vegetables and stuff. I find that that's the big thing I miss sometimes on longer tours is just fresh fruit and produce and vegetables.
Yes.
You don't want to eat stuff from a tin anymore. You're over camp pasta. I want something nice and fresh.
Yeah, I'm over 2-minute noodles right now, but there's a lot of 2-minute noodles ahead of me for a long time.
But just think, you're going to happenstance to discovering some new local thing. I'm not sure what it's going to be and where you're from. Actually, you lived in Zambia for 2 years, so maybe you do know what's coming up.
So here's the really difficult part. We've gone to Zambia, and I ate this food for 2 years, and I just can't stomach it anymore.
Oh!
I know. And so, like, we got to the hotel last night, and they cooked us, like, a traditional village meal, and I just looked at it and I was like, I would rather not eat and be hungry than eat this. And I think it was because, like, at the end of my time in Peace Corps, I was really struggling with anxiety and I was really struggling with a lot of different things, and it kind of presented itself in the food. And so I even had a breakdown about this a couple days ago. I was like, I don't even know if I can tour Africa because I just hate the food so much. And I think it'll get better after we leave Zambia, but it's a bit of a struggle right now. I fully feel like I can tour Africa again. I'm past the food, but it was difficult for a little bit.
It's really hard when something like that happens. It's funny, a fellow anxiety sufferer here, and I've spoken about it quite a lot in many episodes before. One of my big anxieties is like being actually physically ill. Like vomiting is like something that causes me quite a lot of anxiety. I had a really bad gastro bug in Australia, really, really bad, like very, very bad. And I remember I couldn't have what I had for dinner that night for years after because I just associated it with that.
Yes, so you have hit on it so hard. Absolutely, yes. About 3 weeks ago, I got a stomach bug, and it wasn't from the rice and beans I ate, but that was the last thing I ate. And then I got sick like 8, 9, 10 hours later. So they probably weren't related. But we were in this small town, and there was one restaurant, and we were stuck there for a week just because I got so sick. And I was like, I can't eat rice and beans. I can't eat anything from this restaurant. We have to cook all of our meals because I can't go back there. Like, I just associate this food with getting sick, and I can't do it.
2-minute noodles for you.
2-minute noodles.
Laura, we've talked about isolated landscapes, and we've talked about really hard sort of struggle town, mountain climbs, descents, the Baja Divide and the heat and stuff that comes with that as well. Something that I also got struck with was you love those big expanses, don't you? Like, you love seeing a big grand vista. Like, that is a big deal, right?
Yes, I love feeling small and getting the grand vista. I have to admit, I do love kind of rivers and like forests a little bit more than I love deserts. The advantage of deserts is there aren't a lot of people living in them usually. So usually it's kind of a lot easier to get that rural bike touring long distance experience. It's also quite nice when things can dry out. If, when you're in the jungle and everything's getting wet and you're just getting rained on every day, it can get really frustrating pretty quickly. My clothes haven't dried in 3 days and I can't take this. But I do love feeling small and being in this grand landscape and just kind of feel like that's when I'm most connected to the earth and just like realizing of like, wow, we are so small and we're little beings in this whole earth. And it feels like kind of a magical experience to me being in these vast, big landscapes.
I often feel like nothing can put that so starkly front of mind to you than when you're travelling through them on a bike as well. I want to take you to a quote which I came across on your tour when you were in Namibia, which I feel is a country of huge, massive expanses and landscapes. And what you said was, the riding was intense. We regularly went hundreds of miles between water restock and weeks between finding fresh produce. At times, the roads felt like they were made of endless corrugation. The winds were crazy and the temperatures kept climbing, but it quickly became one of my favourite destinations. Now, we've talked a little bit about earning the landscapes and how when things have been difficult, you feel like the reward of the nature around you is just that much more. I guess you've earned it. I want you to take me to why you thought about that with Namibia, because it's really hard to compute one with the other. Like the hardest of everything, isolation, heat, headwinds, really corrugated roads, long distances between resupply, and yet it's one of your favourite places. What was it about Namibia that made that so much like that? Like, what did you love so much about Namibia?
Namibia is one of my favorite places, just because the expanses are so big that when you kind of are traveling between resupply, you're traveling for the day, you're doing your trip, you're just so immersed in it, and you have to kind of be so connected that you're like, all right, like, am I feeling tired? There's shade there. This is the one bit of shade I'm going to see for the next 50 Ks. And you kind of have to like get very in tune with yourself and really kind of think like, okay, this is what I need. This is what's difficult in this moment, and kind of really get down to the bare basics. And like touring in some places, you're like, oh, maybe I could stop for a coffee here, or, there's a lot of other options. But in Namibia, it's kind of so bare basics. So you're just like, I have to cycle. I have to get to this point, that it is just really beautiful. And you had another guest on the show, I think Tara Weir, who said like, you're in these places and you're kind of like, this is dangerous. If something goes wrong, like that would be really bad. And it's kind of this little feeling of like a little bit being scared if you're like, this is really dangerous. And, you kind of want to get out of it because it's so dangerous. But at the same time, it's really rare in life that you get these experiences that you probably won't see a car all day. So if you run out of water, if you run out of food, there's no one that could help you. Like you are fully on your own. And I think that kind of like dependence on yourself is just so exciting, and it's really intense. And thinking about doing Namibia again, I'm like, I don't know if I'd really rush into it, but at the same time, it's just so rewarding. The landscapes are really beautiful. You get to see these like extraterrestrial landscapes with crazy plants all the time. And as we talked about earlier, you're moving through things so slowly that you get to see things kind of change and get to be so in tune that it's really beautiful. So Namibia is just, it's so intense and it's so raw that you're just like, it's you against everything. I love Namibia. I'm so excited talking about it.
I've never been. I'm only imagining this here right now, Laura, but I imagine you have like the most amazing, vibrant night skies there too.
Absolutely. One of the best parts about Namibia is, in a lot of other countries, you kind of have to be like, all right, I'm going to camp. I need to camp in 30 minutes. So I'll start looking now. In Namibia, like literally you're like, all right, time to camp. And you just pull off the road right then and there. Like you will be at an amazing camp spot just because there's so few people there. But that also, since there's so few people, there's not a lot of electricity, nothing to ruin the night sky. And there's also not a lot of trees. So you just have these massive, huge lunarscapes or like starscapes. And the really cool part about Namibia is kind of, you have to keep on track with cycling. You're traveling this day, and you kind of get in tune with the moon cycles. And I find that so beautiful that you're like, all right, it's getting to be a fuller moon and the moon should rise at this time. And one thing actually in Namibia is the winds were really challenging at times. So we were actually cycling at night a few times, and it was right around the full moon. And that feeling of being in tune of like, you're watching the moon rise and cycling through the moon rise is just, it's incredible, of just being able to feel that you are that in tune with what's going on. Because when I was living in a city and working, I didn't know when the moon would rise. I had no, concept of that. It's just kind of like, oh, yeah, the sun's down. Who knows what the moon phase is?
That just randomly reminded me of? It's sort of the same but slightly different. I think it was actually, and we've mentioned it already, hi Steph Devery. She told me that when she was going through Africa, she got to a stage where it almost felt like she learnt these primal things. Like she could tell the time of day by what her shadow looked like.
Totally. Similar, yeah, of just like, and you start getting these like kind of cues of like, the sun starts looking a certain way and you're like, oh, I'm so excited. That means I'm about to camp soon. And I've definitely found myself kind of being like, certain times being like, oh, okay, it's going to get hot soon. So like need to keep riding, all that. But yeah, it's so cool to be able to be in touch with these things that you just, regular life, you wouldn't get to. And, it's very easy to get thrown off them. Just spending a couple weeks working, all of a sudden I'm like, oh, I don't know what phase the moon is in. And, just these little things that you kind of get thrown off by.
The way that you tour now, months at a time, long-term tours, And, you've got this plan for touring through Africa. It's not a point-to-point tour. Like, you're sort of touring each country as deeply for as long as possible, right? Has that transitioned to all of a sudden doing long tours? Has that been an organic change? Has it been a conscious decision? Has it just sort of happened? How have you found yourself in this situation?
Yeah, I think it's been a couple of different kind of factors that have gone into it. I always, when I go to a country or I'm starting thinking about bike touring across the country, I look up all the different things, look up like Atlas Obscura, what like are some neat things in the country, where are the UNESCO World Heritage Sites. And as I learn about more things in each country, I'm always adding of like, oh, I want to go over here, I want to go over here. And you're kind of, it's never a like nice even point to point line of like easy. You do these big squiggles. And so I think it's transitioned a little bit. Part of it's having a partner that had this cycle touring life before I met him. And then also of just me realizing of like, well, I really like traveling and really experiencing all these things. And I think I don't know if I would have slowed down as much without him, because when I initially decided to quit my job, I was like, okay, go, go, go. I want to do these trips. I want to see all these places. And I kind of had this itinerary in my head. But as soon as you get an itinerary, things happen like we've talked about. And maybe this boat from point A to point B is no longer operating. So do you want to take a flight, or do you want to just rework and find a new way around? And so kind of letting go of that work life that I was always go, 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 and like easing more into it and realizing that going slow and hitting everything that you might want to is totally worth it. But there's also, if I look at a country over here, I look at a country and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm going to travel 3,000 kilometers in this country in the next 3 months. I get totally overwhelmed. And so I kind of have to break it down of like, okay, this is the next rest day. It's like 3 days ahead and this is where I'm going to make it. And then who knows what's going to happen after that. And then, just kind of breaking it down slowly, piece by piece.
And I think the other thing that you both do is it's not just about cycling from point A or one day to the next, cycling each day. Like often you are cycling each day, but you are also taking breaks where you're hiking or you're actually seeing the sights and you're spending time in a place that's got nothing to do with riding a bike as well.
Definitely. And I think that's part of the beauty of getting to do a long-term tour and not having to have an end date on it, is that you can go on this boat trip, you can do this hike, and you can do these things that are kind of like side trips and not necessarily within this finite line. And I think it's also beautiful kind of bike traveling in your mid 30s of you're used to a little bit more comfort, and I've made some money and I'm continually able to travel on the road. So I'm able to have a little bit more comfort and pay for luxuries such as like doing a tour of someplace that's really cool that they only offer tours with, and kind of doing a little more luxuries in life that I might not have considered doing at 21 when I first started traveling.
When you're traveling long term and you are tent life for a while, when you do, say, visit family and friends back at home, what's the little luxury thing that you do seek out?
I really seek out like a nice skincare routine. Like I'm talking like a facial, like a cleanser with like serums. Really just, I love feeling my face just being so soft and nice. So I was just home for 6 weeks and I really was just, I had like all these little testers of different skincare things and I was like, ooh, so nice. And also just wearing clothing that's not quick dry or clothing that wrinkles, just wearing like things that I would never pack on the bike, and eating so much food. A lot of eating food.
I thought food would have to be up there. I must say, I am laughing at the idea of like seeking out the facial. I think that's amazing. But also, and listeners, you wouldn't know this, before we press record, Laura and Ali have just come off a monumental, ridiculously long hiker-bike route. But where they are in Zambia, there's been a lot of burning off the old crops. And so there's been sort of ash and soot everywhere. So Laura was telling me about how it was just days of being covered in like soot everywhere. And I was just thinking when you were talking about that, Laura, I bet you were really thinking about that facial then.
I used to, when I came back from visiting home, I had like a small bottle of face cleanser and I lost it. And I was like, as we were going through the dirt, I was like, oh, how nice would it be to really just clean my face really well. But it was mostly my time in the US. I just ate so much food. And I also, like, my sister lives in New York City, and I spent just a full day in Chinatown just eating so much. But the true sadness of going home is when you first get off the bike, your appetite is massive. But as the days go, it just gets smaller and smaller because you're not cycling as much and you're not doing as much activity. So by the end of my time in the US, I would be like buying a lot of food and being like, I can't eat all this. And I'd have leftovers at restaurants. And it really kind of hurt my soul.
I found that with bike tours. Like, I'll do a tour and then all of a sudden it's like I'm hungry for like two people, but I'm not riding anymore. It's like, what's going on?
You just got to embrace it at that point.
That's a hidden skill of mine, Laura. Everyone should know this. I can always eat more. Even when I am full, I can always eat more. And I put it down to being raised by a Greek mother who used to always overfill my plate. And it was always, eat. Are you hungry? No, eat something.
I am so jealous. That is a superpower.
Laura, I want to bring you back on the road to adventures, and I want you to actually take me and the listeners to one day of your trip. Now, listeners, if you are a fan of the show, you have likely heard Laura share one day of our trip in our Cycle Shorts midweek mini episodes. But Laura, I get to ask you the question again, and I want you to pick a day. You've so many countries you could choose from, so many days. Take me and the listener there. Tell us all about one day of your trip.
Yes, so I've chosen another day also in Africa. So my last day was in Lesotho. This day is in Namibia. So we're in Namibia. It's a desert country, very sparsely populated, as we just talked about. We're near Etosha National Park, which is the big national park in the country where they have the big five, all of the animals. On this day, we're going to do a four-wheel drive track that we know nothing about, connecting kind of these two roads up to each other, basically just kind of doing a shortcut, but it's a four-wheel drive track. So it's called Uchatheka Four-Wheel Drive Trail, and it's in northern Namibia. And as I've said, I love researching and finding out information about roads and where we're going, and I found out no information about this. There's nothing out there. I don't know if there's any resupply on this road, and it's only about 70 kilometers, but it's going to be a really fun trip. We start out the morning and we get on the road pretty fast. We get on this four-wheel drive trail, and we've been on a pretty big road, and quickly this four-wheel drive trail goes from passable road to virtually no one's going on it. I don't even know how you could take a car down this, but I'm not a four-wheel driver, so I don't know too much. As we're going, we see our first people, and we're about 20K in at this point, so we're not that far in, but these people are from the Himba tribe. So this is a traditionally nomadic tribe where people still wear traditional clothes. Men wear loincloths, women wear skirts. They don't wear tops, but they wear lots of ornate jewelry. They have dreadlocks that are made out of mud that are really beautiful. So you should look this tribe up if you can. It's incredibly beautiful. And it's one of the last fully nomadic tribes in Africa. So we see these people, and it's really incredible. They're walking to the waterhole nearby, and we just kind of wave and they go by. And then we continue along this four-wheel drive trail, and we saw our first and actually only flowing water of our 3 months in Namibia. So there's this tiny little trickle stream, and it's green and it's beautiful, and there are these really amazing palm trees all around. And it's just a scene that we hadn't seen at all in Namibia, that it's just so beautiful and green. We pass up by this water, and we just kind of continue going up this dry riverbed. And as we're going up, there's a lot of sand, and we're crossing the river a lot. It's these beautiful big rocks, and it's really intense riding, and it's these kind of really small pebbles. So you get into the sand, and then it kind of flips you around, and I was having trouble unclipping from my pedals fast enough. So I had actually fallen 4 times that day. It was a little bit brutal, but it was never a bad fall. It was just kind of those slow clip and falls that are quite demeaning. We're cycling along these beautiful tracks that no one's on, and we come up, and we're kind of cresting the top of this hill, and we look over, and there's must be 30 giraffe and hundreds of zebra.
Wow.
Really far away, but we can see them very clearly. You can't quite get a picture, but they're just all moving in mass. And it was just kind of one of these, whoa, this is really what it kind of is like to be traveling in Africa, to see all of these animals. And it was stunning to see them in this landscape with no one around. And then you kind of have this fear of, you're like, I'm out here by myself. What other predators are there? What other predators could there be? Is it safe for me to be around these animals? And then, you think about it, the animals are more scared of you. But it was just really incredible seeing this sight. And so we continue riding. And as we're riding, you'll hear like some clopping in the distance, and you'll look over and you'll see just a like flash of kind of some stripes. And you just see you're like, that's a zebra. And so as we're riding throughout, getting further in the afternoon, we just keep seeing these animals. And the scenery was stunning with these mountains, and it's very rocky. And I'm continuing to crash throughout the day, but it's not important. Continuing to riding, and as we're kind of getting closer to the other side of the road on our map, we're seeing some nomadic settlements. And they're not currently occupied, but during other months of the year, people bring their sheep there. And so we're in the middle of nowhere, but there are these 10-foot high barbed wire fences to keep the sheep in. And so you'll just see these like enclosures that they're not that big, but they're massive fences to keep the sheep safe from lions and hyenas and other animals. And so there's no one around, but you're seeing these really big enclosures. It's a bit scary. And as we continue cycling, we're cycling past a bunch of these enclosures. There's a town on our map. We really need this town because we're completely out of water. And so as we get to this town, we realize this town does not exist. There's no water here. So we are running out of water. We don't know where the nearest water is at this point. So it's kind of like, all right, we need to stop cycling so slow and go a little bit faster. So we get to the top of this massive hill, and it's like a 30% down, hike a bike, just keep going down. We're like, maybe from the top of this hill, we'll be able to see some water. Nothing. It's getting a little bit bleak and getting towards nightfall. But finally, we come across a village. We're so excited, and there's a school there. So we go fill up our bottles. And as we're filling up bottles, and this at this small school where kids board at the school because their villages are really far off, there's just giraffes that come through the village. And we're like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. There's giraffes at the school. This is so cool. And just the head teacher goes, oh yeah, that happens. Like, we see them here all the time. It's just giraffes. And we're like, oh, okay, just giraffes at your school. And then we're asking like, oh, do lions ever come? And they're like, yeah, lions come 2 or 3 times a year. It's no big deal. And we're like, oh, cool. Giraffes and lions at your school. No big deal. So we fill up with our water bottles, and it's getting quite close to dark. So we're like, oh, great, perfect. We cycle down to the main road. And right as we get to the main road, this overlanding vehicle comes by, and they stop. And it's these 2 really nice Canadian guys, and they're super excited to meet us, and they're really sweet. And one of the funny things that happened is they asked, they're like, have you ever run out of water? And we're like, oh yeah, about 10 minutes ago. And they're like, oh, all we want to do is just see giraffes. Like, we just want to see a giraffe on this trip. And I was like, man, today has been all about giraffes. I've seen probably 60 or 70 giraffes today. Like, we just saw them up the road at the school, and just realizing how neat of an experience that was. And then we say goodbye, and they drive off, and we just pop right down 20 feet down the road and just go and find a beautiful place to camp, and just had a beautiful night camping. And it was so cool to have this really rustic, really tough day of being on this 4-wheel drive trail. And all of a sudden you come out and you're on the main road and you're seeing tourists again. And it's kind of like, wow, we had such a day, and we saw all these amazing things and this really traditional culture and all of these animals and this beautiful untouched scenery. And then you just pop out and you're like, oh, there's tourists here, and you're trying to see these things that we just got to see.
Wow. Like, where do I even go with that? Wow. Like, giraffe day and everything, zebras, everything. But even, you know what I love the most? The fact that, like, you're in it, the experience, it's all so hard. You run out of water, you refill, you're having this quintessential, could never have planned for experience that blows your mind. And then you see the 2 Canadian guys that would do anything probably to just see one. And you're like, oh, we've seen a ton of them, guys.
Yeah. It was so funny. And we met so many people throughout Namibia that kept being like, oh, I just want to see a giraffe. And I was like, man, we're seeing them like all the time, constantly in different areas. But yeah, we saw so many. And so it was just, we felt so lucky that to have that incredible day and to have the difficulty of the water at the end, and then be reminded throughout it all of like what you're getting to do is so cool, because these people really want to be having the same experience and they're not able to.
Yeah, just another insight as to maybe why Namibia has become one of your favorite countries as well. Wow.
Definitely, for
Just
sure.
one more for emphasis. Wow.
It was incredible. It was that such a memorable day. Goes down as one of my favorite days of cycling ever.
Oh, I can totally see why. Laura, I really need to wrap things up. I could speak to you not just for hours, I think I could speak to you for days.
I do think so.
If people are going to want to look and follow your journey along, what's the best way that they can do that? How can they find you out there?
My Instagram is Laura Bikes and Snacks. That's my primary right now. So I don't have a website or anything. Maybe one day it's coming. So maybe by the time this comes out, it'll come. But I've also been saying that for a couple of years. So it probably won't. But
if it does, I'll link to it in the far future.
Thank you.
And listeners, I will provide a link to it in the show notes as well. I definitely encourage you to check it out, because what I love about your post, Laura, is not just the scenery and stuff, but your sense of humor comes across too. I really jive with it. So yeah, I love it. All right, last 3 questions, Laura. First one's music related. And it is, if you could pick a song that's going to be a soundtrack to your adventures, what song would you choose?
It's a song called 100 Bad Days by a band called AJR. And the whole premise of the song is I've had 100 bad days, but I have 100 good stories. And I can find myself when I'm having a bad day, whether it's I'm not feeling great, food related, whatever, heat related, that I just kind of could get into a negative spot. And then I realized I'm like, this is going to be a really good story. Even if everything goes wrong, this is going to be a really funny story at the end. So that song kind of reminds me of like, if I have 100 bad days, I'm going to have 100 good stories, and that's going to make me interesting at parties. So this is all going to be really funny.
I love it. All right, you are there, and you are on the Seek Travel Ride Guest music playlist, available on Apple and Spotify, and I think YouTube Music now as well. Although, heads up, listeners, hopefully I will have fixed this by the time this episode gets released, but for some reason, Spotify sort of semi-locked me out of my account, my playlist, and I can't add songs to it yet.
Oh, no.
Anyway, I'm hoping to fix it, but I've spent a week at it and nothing's happened yet. Anyway, we'll see how we go with that. But I love the 100 Bad Days, 100 stories. I just think of how many stories I haven't been able to listen to so far. And yeah, maybe there's another episode with you to come, Laura. I'd so welcome that. Catch up a year in the future and see where you've been. That'd be amazing.
Well, I already want to chat with you more, so yes.
There we go. Locked in. Okay, final 2 questions. You know what these are. You were given the choice one day, and you can choose to cycle forever up a constant, never-ending hill climb. I'm going to put you on the Jordan bike trail and one of those hill climbs, one of those ridiculously mental ones. Steep and gnarly, and it's not going to be asphalt either. Or you could choose to cycle into a horrendous headwind like you likely had in Namibia. Which one are you going to choose?
So, like any sane person, if you listen to multiple episodes of this podcast, any sane person chooses the uphill. But I have decided that I'm redoing this question, so I will pick the headwind in a way. So I decided the only way I would pick the headwind if it was endless corrugations. So like when you're on a gravel road, you know, those little...
Yes,
those little bumps you get. So the only way I would pick the endless headwind is if it was endless corrugations or endless headwinds. So I just rethought that because I feel like everyone chooses the uphill, so I needed to rethink it. But in your case, I'm picking the endless uphill. But if I had to find a way to pick the endless headwind, that would be corrugations versus headwinds. So.
Do you know what's really apt about this? Claire White, who's by the time this episode goes out, she'll be in China. She's nearly through Mongolia now. She sent me a message saying, Bella, you need to change this question and add corrugations because they're up there. You need to connect with her and say, right up there, honey. I agree.
Ever since you messaged me about do you want to come on the podcast? I have been thinking about this. I've been like, okay, every time she asks this question, everyone says uphill, but I want to change that so it's a fairer question. And I'm like, endless corrugations or endless headwinds.
Do you know what? Maybe from now on, Laura, people will get the new version.
Ooh, that would be that would be a really big deal for me.
Oh, all right. Well, I could commit to that because I'm sick of everyone choosing Team Hill Climb, even though I'm on it. I love hills.
I think we just had to find a way.
We do. Maybe we have. We could add rain into the mix too. Okay, final question. Ooh. You're given the choice one day. You can cycle for 4 hours on your own or 4 hours with other people. And caveat that other people doesn't have to be Ali. It can be anybody. What are you going to choose? On your own, or like, are you going to go solo, or are you going to go with others?
I'm always going to choose other people. I do love biking solo, and I love just kind of the freedom it gives you to wander, to your mind to wander and to go all these places. And I have done about 4 or 5 months of solo travel during my 2.5 years of full-time travel. But I love traveling with other people. I love what you learn from other people. I love just all the conversations that you get to have and like the kind of different ways that people's minds work. You know, you're talking to someone and, you know, you're just thinking about this hill in one way, but instead they're thinking like, oh, this is my commute that I used to have times 3, or, you know, I can run this distance in this amount of time. And it's just the way people think is so different. So I always love learning how different people think.
Oh, I love that answer. And it's funny, when you were talking about that, it just reminds me how every guest that I've interviewed, some of their journeys have been in similar places, but everyone's experiences has been so unique and different, and different days have meant different things for them.
Definitely.
And there's been so many learnings from that, and that sort of molds it all into one. I love it. It's so beautiful.
And can I sneak in a quick question? You can edit this out, but can I sneak in a question to you? I ask this question to every bike traveler I meet. So everyone I meet on the road, I ask this question to. What is your luxury item that you carry on your bike?
Oh.
So for me, this is an electric toothbrush. I have to have an electric toothbrush. I think just the cleanliness you feel from having an electric toothbrush is unmatched. People have given me flack about it, but I love having an electric toothbrush. So I will easily take that weight penalty. I have many other weight penalties, but electric toothbrush is mine. So do you have one?
Well, I do. I've got a recent new one, but I'll give you my original old one, which was, I'm a massive coffee lover and I will always take the weight penalty for good coffee. And so I take an AeroPress with me and coffee. I don't have a coffee grinder. I just get coffee, ground up already. And look, I have many, many times before had instant coffee when I'm bike touring, and that's totally fine. It's not coffee. It's a coffee-flavoured beverage, and I'll deal with that. I have leveled up on the weight penalty and the space penalty on the luxury, and I've said no more to sitting in the dirt, and I now have a camp chair. And I went for a Helinox camp chair, which feels uber luxurious now that I'm in it. But can I just say, I love it. I love it so much, and I will ditch other things if I have to make sure that I can always bring that.
I recently am a chair convert too, and I legitimately don't know how I survived without a chair. I'm a chair person now. I have a crazy creak, so you're sitting on the ground, slightly different, but chair person every day.
But you're not in the dirt.
You're not in the dirt? You have a backrest?
You do, and it's just beautiful.
It's amazing.
Isn't it funny that what we all want is clean teeth, a nice cup of coffee, and somewhere to sit with back support?
It's simple.
Laura, this has been such a fun time. I have enjoyed this so much. It has been an absolute pleasure to dig into your stories, learn about how you came to be taking these long, amazing bike tours of yours, and to just get snippets of insights into what the reality of being on the road day to day in different countries in those different landscapes has been. There's definitely a big hint of you're really aware of your environment when you're in it. You're aware of the hard challenges that you're facing, but you're still taking them on, because obviously the yearning to see what's on the other side, or to get that big view or that payoff, it's still there. You've got that curiosity with which you travel. I also really love the idea that you've got so many days ahead of you to keep getting so many experiences. I don't want any of those days to be bad days. I want you to have many amazing encounters that you could never have dreamt of. But most of all, thank you so, so much for sharing your stories and experiences here on the show for Seek Travel Ride.
Thank you, Bella. I always admire in all of your podcasts how you make every guest seem amazing and every guest so inspirational. And I feel like I'm even inspired by myself hearing about my travels through you. So thank you so much for kind of making me see myself in a new light. This has been truly an honor, and I've had just such a good time with you. I can't wait till we talk next, because it's going to happen for sure.
That was such an awesome and fun chat there that I had with Laura, listening to what it's been like for her on her bike tours. And I really love just the enthusiasm that she sort of embraced this touring lifestyle with. It was interesting how when I asked her how she'd made that transition, how it sort of has happened organically, but how she's also changed that rigid structure with which she seeks to travel. She's gone from being the person that's had the necessary hit list of these are the things I need to do in this time frame to really embracing the idea of traveling with an open-ended time date and trying to take the most out of each area, but also hinting at the idea of listening to yourself and your own body, and if you're not physically feeling it or mentally feeling it, that it is A-okay to just stop, seek shelter, take a break, call the day short, and just enjoy the rest of your day there and then recommence the day after. I absolutely love my chat with Laura. We are definitely slow descending downhill buddies, and I, like you, many listeners, will no doubt be keeping an eye on her socials to see her African adventures unfold. Thank you, Laura. If you are enjoying what I'm putting together here on the podcast, then definitely make sure you are signed up to the Seek Travel Ride newsletter. I send this out every month, and in it I let you know who the guests for that month are going to be, so you get a little guest preview, as well as share a lot of news from our community. Seek Travel Ride has become truly global. We have listeners around in 155 countries, 6,500 cities, I believe now, which blows my mind. And many of you are in the bike adventure community, so it's a real pleasure to be able to share your stories in the newsletter as well. To sign up, it's easy. Just click on the link in the show notes and you will receive Seek Travel Ride news to your inbox. And until the next episode, I'm Bella Malloy. Thanks for listening.